Welcome back, everybody, to another episode of Life from the Inside Out with Kris. Before we begin with Kris's unparalleled metaphysical content, I know that many of you watching have felt a sense of being ungrounded, unhinged, or out of balance in these times. I know. I've felt this way too. Kris's teachings have similarities to popular ideas such as the law of attraction and the secret. The difference is that Kris's knowledge goes even deeper into reality creation and helps resolve many of the problems identified with the law of attraction. The information he shares helps restore grounding and that sense of balance that many of us have lost in these times. If you're ready for the law of attraction and secret 2.0 and want to be a part of this fantastic community, then hit that like button, subscribe, drop a comment below, and press the bell icon so that you get notified when Kris releases cool, new metaphysical content. Kris also offers life-changing online seminars, private sessions, and mentoring sessions, which are all linked in the description below. Glad you're here with us, and let's jump into it. And welcome back, everybody, to another episode of Life from the Inside Out with Kris. And last time we had one of our exciting group episodes and had a number of lovely questions and dialogue, and ready to get going again today. And so we're here with Serge and just going to say hi before we get started.
Hey, Dan. Nice to be here with you again. And it's also nice that we're getting a little steadier summer instead of still very cold weather. So that's very helpful. And all the trees are green and ready for the season.
Yeah, sounds nice. Well, it's very nice in California as well. There's one of the other channelers, Elias. He always starts his some of his things with "as always," and so anybody asks about California weather, it's like, as always. It's kind of steady. So, but yeah, I'm excited to get going, and I think there's a number of really cool topics potentially on the table, and I'm interested to see where we run with it.
Ready to go?
Yeah, I'm ready.
Now we trust that you are comfortable.
Well, very comfortable, Kris. Thank you.
And we thank you for your consideration.
Thanks for yours as well.
And as always, the weather, wherever the weather is fine.
Very much so.
That could be a challenging statement, considering some parts of the world at different times experience extremes in weather conditions. But the weather, interestingly enough, is not managed nor controlled by the weather station. Did you know that?
Yes. Mm-hmm.
And did we say that tongue in cheek, of course? The weather is a direct result or outcome of various, how do we say, general feeling tones of segments of the population. The mental atmosphere of groups of people or an entire nation or multiple nations have an strong influence in how the weather manifests itself in those particular parts of the world. It is not necessarily a subject matter we will expand very much upon this evening, but the weather is something that reflects the moods and the states of mind of vast tracts of the population. So that is something to keep in mind, especially considering that your species is experiencing extremes in weather conditions. Some call it global warming or global change in weather, and so on and so forth. Because there are different kinds of changes. As dear Mr. Sherlock Holmes is wont to say, the game is afoot, Watson. So there is a kind of game here. Obviously, it is not the kind of game that you would develop into an Olympic sport. But there is a particular reason for weather as it appears in different locales or locations. Now, earlier on, you and Joseph were having a little exchange about the ego, that very much maligned, very bad-mouthed part of the human personality structure. Mm-hmm. Is that correct?
Yeah,
it
absolutely.
It is worth noting that it is difficult for individuals, especially those who are more rooted in the events and conditions and circumstances of the material or physical experience, the human condition. For such individuals, there is such a close identification with this thing that is referred to as the ego that they might assume that the ego is what they are, or that they are what the ego is. Whilst in truth, the person is actually very different from the ego. The ego, as we have suggested recently, can act much more like the rudder on a ship, assisting you to get to a particular destination on the open waters. Without a rudder, you do not necessarily travel very far, and perhaps just in circles, if at all. So the ego is an indelible part of the human personality structure. It is not necessarily something you can pluck out, like some people may pluck eyebrows. You cannot just pluck the ego out, because it is a basic part and function of the self. And when we say the self, we mean the greater self, as well as, without belittling anyone else, we will just say the lesser self, the focused personality. The ego does not disappear, even though one may wish it. The ego does not get destroyed and eliminated, whether one takes various kinds of psychedelic drugs. Its present arrangement or construct may be disrupted. So in such cases, another similar structure is then provided, because it is an integral part of the personality structure. So even if you mess one up or cut one up, you will be supplied with another. You need that to function within physical, material experience. And especially when you consider that the human being is very much integrated in his or her idea of selfhood through the ego, it is also quite understandable that you would think, as many people are wont to think, that once you begin the process of death, some people refer to it as crossing over or passing over, that of course they would be forever eliminated, annihilated, that they will simply vanish. And again, such is not necessarily the case. That part of you that you identify with the ego is directly connected to the inner self, and it is utilized, and the ego can very nicely understand and assist in any kind of spiritual adventuring, if you like. It is not the enemy of spiritual life, as it is often depicted. It is not anti-spiritual. You do not have to smash it or kill it in order to try and become a better person. Again, to utilize an analogy, imagine that a marathon runner decides, well, if I was lighter, I would likely be able to run faster. So let's cut off my legs. And of course, you can see right there that such a marathon runner will not be successful at all. So you cannot necessarily destroy the ego, but you can unsettle its basic relationship with you, because it is you who has a tight grip on the ego, not the ego who has a tight grip on you. You are the one that is obstructing your own, say, spiritual growth because of various kinds of beliefs or ideas that you hold, that you may have heard, read about, or think that you understand. But if instead you have a better understanding of the ego as an actual viable assistant and of great help in any kind of spiritual endeavor, then of course you will have that help. You will not have resistance. You will not think that somehow or other your ego is impeding your spiritual growth, because the very idea itself is what gets in the way of your spiritual growth. Look at it this way. When economists, investors, the stock markets begin to chat about perhaps there might be an inflation, perhaps there will be financial troubles, what do you think they are doing? They are encouraging a certain knee-jerk reaction from the taxpayer to start reducing their confidence in the economy, reducing their purchasing, which reduces income for the population, which reduces the investments and the monies available. So the very chat itself is an impediment. And this is not something we are making up. You can see this. You can read about it. It is not news. So the very idea that you have a built-in system that can assist you greatly in any kind of spiritual endeavor will automatically bring you a greater success, less impediments, less resistance, because the impediments and resistances are all your own. No one is imposing them upon you. Basically, because you, the individual, create your experience by the thoughts and ideas and beliefs that you then turn into your feelings, emotions, and imaginations, which then sets the system to literally follow your dictates. You set the template, you set the blueprint, so the experience follows suit. Does that make sense to you?
Yeah, as you were talking, the idea that it's not the function of the ego itself, but our beliefs about the ego that could be problematic or create a particular perception, and the same in that particular example, that it's just of the economy, that it's just following through with the particular beliefs, because beliefs that's what people do when inflation happens, and then those things start to
And
go.
it then you can see the hamster wheel effect. And the faster people do it, the less the economy goes anywhere. The other interesting thing concerning the ego is, as we ourselves and many others have mentioned, you are multi-dimensional beings. You are more than the sum of all of your parts. You have more than one ego. You are simply fixated on one particular formulation of it, one particular example of it, one edition of the ego, but you have others. So again, even when you die, even when you leave this body, you will have a different version of the ego. And what you associated with your identity does not necessarily merge and disappear into the greater self. It becomes part of the greater self. Your identity is inviolate. It cannot ever be dismissed, diminished, made to disappear, or annihilated. But you do give up certain limiting ideas about yourselves, and very, very nicely, a different version of the ego, a much broader, more expansive, less limited version of the ego becomes your helpmate, your navigator. So you'll never be bereft of that. The very idea that the ego and yourself would perish is almost unbelievable. But because you believe it, you must act it out at some particular point until that moment when you realize, hey, I remember leaving my body. I remember the process of death. And yet I am still I. I am still me, just slightly different. Less limited, able to do things and experience things I could not while I was in the physical. Does that also make sense to you?
Yeah, it does. And as you were talking earlier, there was a question, or maybe more of a connection, that we talked a lot on some of these episodes about the shift or shifts in consciousness, and the topic of has the world gone bananas. It would seem to me that potentially some of these beliefs about our ego is what's making this more difficult, that we're attached to this one idea or this one ego, and there's really multiple egos that are, or egos or ideas that we can shift and move into, but we're kind of stuck on this one.
Indeed, that is correct. When you refuse to let go of the parameters or the orders, the commands, quote, the beliefs you have given to that part of the self, that you can only do this, you can only do that, that your activities, your events, your situations, your circumstances from today are all the results of things that happened to you in the past, even in the so-called past lives. You literally stick it to yourself. There is no cosmic power no supernatural beings or deities that are doing any such thing to you. You are not here to suffer for past sins, as is often used. You are not here to suffer because of past transgressions of any kind. You are here to learn and experience the very power of creativity, of love and collaboration that you are born with. So even if you leave this particular body, you will continue to experience and learn how to use those very three things: love, creativity, and collaboration. Whether you do it in one body or another, or 10 bodies or 100 bodies, you will always do it because it is foundational. It is not an material thing. This is a spiritual foundation. So it will always be part of you. And you will always have multiple egos. So even if you were to try and trash one, as if you could really file 13, the ego, the natural creativity of the self simply replicates or sends, if you want to. It is perhaps a poor expression, but you have access to multiple egos. And when someone has a powerful and deep transformative experience, some have spiritual awakenings, then they may have tapped into a broader definition of self, which would include a broader definition and function of the ego than the one they were accustomed to, though they might still find remnants or traces of that old self. They would be unable to function fully as they did in the past. They would have a broader, more expansive, a wider view, and then, of course, a wider set of beliefs concerning the human experience. So, all it is win-win for everyone. We ourselves always refer to ourselves as we. You could say we are non-binary long before non-binary was a term. As a result of that, we have always cherished all of the various personalities with their delightful egos from all of their different focuses or incarnations, if you like. They are never tossed aside. In fact, they encapsulate quite a unique set and even unique sets of vision and perception and perspectives into what it is to be. None of that should ever be dispensed with. Look at it this way. A gardener will go out in the spring, begin to till his plot of land. Then he will create the rows, he will sow the seeds, he will water them, make certain they have sunshine and warmth. He will weed out those things that should not be there, according to the farmer. And he will nurture his seedlings and eventually his plants, whether they are flowers or vegetables or fruits or all of them. But the farmer always uses his experience, or her experience for that matter. A farmer uses past experience because it is important. It assists the farmer in knowing if some plants might be susceptible to disease or fungus or other situations or pests. So that knowledge is invaluable to the farmer. Even the knowledge of the soil and the pH and the conditions. It is all invaluable. The farmer doesn't toss that out every fall and then start from scratch. After so many years, the farmer may be sought out. Dear farmer, I am new at this farming thing. Would you have any kind words and words of wisdom that can help me become a better, younger farmer? And so on and so forth. Does that make some sense?
Yeah, so rather than trying to throw all that knowledge out, you're taking it and building on it, and sounds like then eventually begin to share it with others.
Indeed. And eventually the new farmers may share their knowledge with yet a new generation, and so on and so forth. And this is how ancient farmers passed on the knowledge to the next generation and the next generation. Knowledge of the village, the customs, the traditions, the healing herbs, how to be, how to live, was always handed down to the point where there is a vast storehouse of knowledge deposited within the consciousness of that population. And all of that also represents various egos as they grow in the garden of the mind.
Well, I'm loving that, Kris, and I think we're maybe getting close to a break point, and I think maybe we can build on some of that next episode too.
Indeed, it might be time to go check those seedlings.
I love it. Thanks for watching, and if you would like to leave a question for Kris, drop it in the comments below. Myself, Serge, or someone from the Kris team will be checking and may use them to drive the discussion, put them in future episodes. So if you'd like to interact with the Kris community, feel free. Put your questions below, and we'd love to hear from you, and see you again next time.